Pyrenees at Aix-les-Thermes. Stuart O'Grady and Paolo Bettini are heading up towards the feeding station now. They don't stop there, by the way, as many viewers once wrote and asked me if they sat down and had a meal, and the answer is an emphatic no. They snatch it on the run and try to get away to the finish. Paolo Bettini, a good man to be away with O'Grady. Two very strong escape riders today for sure.
Well, the feeding area always a little bit chaotic as the riders reach out for the plastic bags full of goodies extended by the team Saunières. There you see the posties leading the peloton, now 3 minutes 30 seconds behind the breakaway. Welcome back, going through the feed zone. This is the peloton. Up the road, Vicente Garcia Acosta, the Abanesto.com team, is 2 minutes 35 seconds behind our two breakaway riders, Paolo Bettini and Stuart O'Grady, and 55 seconds ahead of the peloton, which contains the yellow jersey of Francois Simon, the King of the Mountains, on the back of Laurent Bru, and the white jersey of Best Young Rider for Oscar Sevilla, as well as the U.S. Postal Service team, including Lance Armstrong. Once again, here's Phil and Paul.
Once we leave the town here of Quillon, it becomes a very much a narrow-roaded, undulating stage right through to the finish. We've got two climbs, followed by two vicious descents, and then the long climb up to the finish. And the last climb is an 11-kilometer climb, which is just under 7 miles. And the finish line will await at the top. But the weather has settled down now, and we're all extremely glad about that. This is Pascal Lorente from the Kelme team, who's having a little escape.
Well, it looks as if somebody else has gone off the front of the main field. In fact, this is Bettini, who's left Stuart O'Grady behind. Now, this is a bit of a blow for Stuart, and he had hoped to stay with Bettini for as long as possible. But don't forget, Bettini is a very good bike rider in the climbs, much better than the Australian Stuart O'Grady, who was a former track rider, is certainly never at ease, and I know all about that. In fact, Bettini has won Liège-Bastogne-Liège in the past. He's won a stage at the Tour de France, and he's been placed highly in a lot of the one-day classics. But in the early part of his career, he was regarded as a man who could ride high in the overall standings of the Grand Tours, finishing 7th overall in the Giro d'Italia back in 1998. He now is taking off and decided that he hasn't got much help coming from Stuart O'Grady anymore, and he will try and conserve as much of his advantage as possible.
Well, with 63 kilometres to go, this is a brave move by Bettini. He must have sensed that Stuart O'Grady is not going well enough for him, and he wants to increase his lead. Well, he's got a confirmed lead at the feeding station there of 3 minutes and 40 seconds. And he's not prepared to wait. Now the road now is uphill or down dale. There's no more flat now all the way to the finish, and we've still got that 62 kilometres to ride. A brave gamble by Bettini, 2 victories this year only. But the thing is, this man gets results. 5th in the big classic in Italy, Milan-San Remo this year, and 2nd overall in the Tour of Langkawi, where he held the race lead there for a day. So Paolo Bettini now is 27 years of age, this man, and the stage winner of last year's Tour de France, as well as a high finish in the Tour of Italy back in 1998. He finished 7th then. So he has the qualities of being a very good stage race rider, and he's decided to try for a win, and that Mappe could do with a result, couldn't they?
They certainly could, because they've lost their sprinter, Tom Steels. He started the Tour de France after a very long illness. He was actually suffering from mononucleosis, and about 6 or 7 riders from that squad have been suffering from the same thing. He contracted that disease around about 8 months ago, and he's fought a long, hard battle to try and get himself back to fitness. He had thought he could ride himself into good form here at the Tour de France, but I think it was just a little bit too tough for Tom Steels. Michele Bartoli has tried several times to get himself a stage win, and this could be the ideal situation. Up the road there, you can see just in the top lacet is Garcia Acosta, as this man from Kelme now is trying to get across the gap at the moment. Pasquale Lorente is the man trying to make the gap, and this is a very important situation right now here for the Kelme squad, Phil. They will try and send riders up the road one at a time, and they can then use their ability in these mountains to leapfrog men forward.
Well, this is an interesting pattern which is forming here now, because still the leaders of the Tour de France, the yellow jerseys Simon and Armstrong and Belocchi, are waiting in the main field. They might have decided today, for them it will be showdown on the last climb. They're trying to monitor who is attacking from the front of the field, and we have some interesting names at the moment. Bettini, O'Grady, Garcia Acosta, Pasquale Lorente, all separate on the climb.
the peloton is 50 seconds behind that final rider in what is essentially now 3 one-man breakaways. Here's a look at Paolo Bettini with the biggest cycling team in the world, Alpe Quick-Step. We'll be back to France in just a moment. Welcome back. This is the Poursuivant, the chaser. This is Vicente Garcia Acosta of the Ibanesto.com team, as he tries to bridge across from the peloton, shown right there, to the 2 riders out front, Paolo Bettini and Stuart O'Grady. Now, the big news of today's stage thus far happened very early on when this man, Christophe Moreau, last year's 4th place finisher, winner of the prologue this year, suddenly pulled to the side of the road, climbed off, actually staggered off as though he were in some kind of distress, climbed into the team car and withdrew from the 2001 Tour de France. There's Roman Weinsteins in the jersey of world champion. There is number 135 from the CSC Tiscali team. That is Nicolas Jalabert, younger brother of Laurent Jalabert, who has put a charge into his countrymen with 2 stage wins thus far on the tour. Here are Phil and Paul.
And this is the sharp end of the peloton. A little attack again coming from David Echevarria. And he's taking with him here a rider, Odriozola, Gian Odriozola from Benesto. His teammates up the road, Vicente Garcia Acosta, so it'd be nice help if he got up there to reach him. David Echevarria lost a lot of time early on in the tour. He's not a big threat to the overall, so this might be a good move by these 2. And remember, if they can get up there and merge again with O'Grady, then O'Grady could find himself back up amongst the leaders, because he's very wise. He's not a great climber. He's very wise not to do too big an effort on the climb. It looks as though Garcia Acosta here has now quickly been joined here by Pasquale Lorente, the Kelme boy. So together now, well, he's not waiting for him, is he? He dropped back to give his crash helmet in, and he's going. But Pasquale Lorente onto his wheel, and they're going to pick up Stuart O'Grady, I would think, pretty soon. We've got no time check between the 2 groups here at the moment.
Armstrong must have expected this to happen, and again attacks coming off the front end of the main field. Again, Carlos Sastre from Once leaping forward right now, being chased by Alexander Vinokourov. Armstrong must have known this, because in the newspaper of the organization this morning, L'Equipe, the Spanish riders said, we will go on the attack, we will try and destroy Armstrong in the mountains. And that is exactly what they are doing. They will launch attacks over the next 3 days. This is the terrain of the Spaniards, as Sastre is about to make the junction now with the man who went away from the main field a few moments ago, Odriozola and David Echevarria. And just in front of them, you can see the yellow car, and that yellow car will be Vicente Garcia Acosta, and with him, Pasquale Lorente, the man from the Kelme squad. But today, the Spaniards are living up to their word at the moment.
This is a very nasty road now, all the way down to Axley Term. We drove it, in fact, yesterday. The conditions weren't as beautiful as they are today. But this is a real twisty now, and the riders very often out of sight of the race. There's the 2 up front. Already these 4 have picked up then Garcia Acosta and Pasquale Lorente, leaving just O'Grady and then Bettini. Now, Stuart O'Grady is going to have to hook his braces onto the back of this group when they come up and go forward with them again. This is developing, Paul, into a really good group of climbers.
It's a huge group of climbers. They've got a long plateau over the top of the summit of this climb right now, which is a very difficult stage for everybody concerned. The race left from Perpignan this morning, Phil, and immediately after just 42 miles of racing, the riders climbing to 1,500 meters at the summit of the Col de Joux. A long descent and a bit of flat into the town of Quillon, and then again it's up the Col de Coudon, which is where we are at the moment. After the Col de Coudon, it's basically a plateau before the long plunge down into the town of Axley-Terme, and then the final long ascent up here to the finish, where I think a lot of riders are going to explode, because although it didn't look too difficult on the graphic, I think it will be quite a tough climb after a hard day's racing, which is what we're actually experiencing at the moment.
So we now have 6 riders here looking for the Australian in the green jersey. And he can't be that far ahead, but we think he's about 2 minutes ahead of this group, and they're not satisfied at all here with holding it together. They've started yet another flurry of attacks. Doesn't look like a major problem for any of them. They're going to stretch it and then come together. The latest check back to the peloton now is 3 minutes and 43 seconds. But they're only 13 seconds behind this group here, who are trying to go forward now to O'Grady. O'Grady is riding good tempo. As you look at the world champion here, Roman Weinsteins, He has been dropped because of that flurry of attacks. He's not having a good tour there. The peloton have already gone and left him behind. He's already decided, Paul, he's just going to ride through to the finish.
Well, that's actually a long way to go to the finish, to be sitting up and trying to just get inside the time limit, because he's only covered around about 105 kilometers of today's stage, which is 166 kilometers in length. So he could find himself getting eliminated at the end of the day. After all, the time limits are not huge. This looks like Bobby Julich coming out of the pack right now. Julich is looking to try and ride himself back up the overall standings, but a very bad time trial by him, where he lost an awful lot of time. He was put under pressure on the first mountainous stage in the Alps, but very often a rider can bounce back. Many riders having a big difference in the way they handle the Alps and the Pyrenees.
Well, Bobby Julich was in trouble on the Col d'Azur. He was left behind, he got back, and it looks like he's now decided the best thing to do is to attack and get a bit of a gain over the field. This is the face of little David Echeverria, the former amateur champion of the road for Spain, turned professional. His very first professional race, by the way, was in Australia, in the area around Mount Buller, when he rode there with Pat Yonker, who is a South Australian, and he came over then as a member of the Once team. He's developed into a really good rider and a double stage winner in the past of the Tour de France. Well, it seems that they've all decided that the main contenders aren't going to race so hard today, so they're going to test them by attacking them, and we're getting plenty of attacks right now.
And this is exactly what we saw early in the race. As soon as the road turned up, we had a flurry of attacks off the front. Now American Bobby Julich with Crédit Agricole, as the boys mentioned, trying to recoup some of the time he lost before the rest day on that fateful individual time trial from Grenoble to Chamroux. Echevarria off the front again, taking a look back over his shoulder to be sure he's clear. He'll be back. Riders making it 4 distinct groups. Paolo Bettini alone off the front, followed by Stuart O'Grady. Then this man, David Echevarria, and behind him a group of 7 riders, which now includes American Bobby Julich, who has bridged across. Here's Phil Liggett and Paul Sherwen.
And there's Bobby Julich, centre, with the green shorts on, as this group tries to get itself organised here, riding approximately 2 minutes behind Stuart O'Grady, but a bit disorganised right now because David Echevarria has attacked them. In the far distance you can see Echevarria, and they seem to have lost their drive a little bit.
Well, absolutely real disorganization in this group at the moment, and if they want to stay off the front of the main field, which is not too far behind them at the moment, they really need to set a hard tempo on this part of the course. They're on the second climb of the day at the moment, the Col de Coudon, and although it only climbs up to 800 meters, it seems as if everybody wants to get off the front of this group on their own, and that is a little bit crazy when you imagine there's still over 60 kilometers to go to the finish.
Well, these boys give me the impression that they're getting so disorganized they're going to surrender to the peloton, which is not very far behind them right now. And Bobby Julich might be well to, if he could do it, to have another little acceleration and see what can happen. We lost a Kelme rider on that corner. He shot away, and here he is. He swung wide because the inside of these hairpin bends are very steep indeed, often as steep as 25%. But this rider was the one that came up a few moments ago with Bobby Julich, Felix Cardenas, and he has now decided to try and use his fresh legs to reach the leader.
One of the Colombian riders on the Kelme squad. He rides very much alongside his teammate Santiago Botero. He's opened up a small margin, but this is a very strange situation on the course. That was a very good working group just a few moments ago, and if they'd actually worked together, I felt they could open up a good gap over the main field. The man leading the bike race is still Paolo Bettini, the winner last year of Liège-Bastogne-Liège, and normally a very good teammate for the Mapei squad, riding very many of his races alongside Michele Bartoli. He's 1.5 minutes ahead of Stuart O'Grady on the main field, and the main field actually closing in somewhat right now to 3.5 minutes behind Bettini. Still, the majority of the work on the front of that group is being done by the US Postal Service team, but they have today, Phil, had a small amount of help from the Bonjour team. What the US Postal team want to do today is really toughen up the race. They've announced that beforehand. They expected these huge attacks to come from the Spanish riders, but what they want to do is wear down the 2 riders in front of Lance Armstrong in the overall standings. Those riders are Francois Simon, the man who's the overall leader, and Andrei Kivilev. And it seems as if they are, in fact, recuperating after those easy 2 days that the majority of them have had. all of the riders of US Postal Service, apart from Lance Armstrong, didn't try in that individual time trial. For them, it was their first day of rest, and then the long transfer by plane from Perpignan down to Perpignan allowed the US Postal riders to recover yet again. And morale, Phil, I would say, is certainly on a high after those two back-to-back stage wins by Armstrongs in the Alps.
Well, this is a wonderful stretch of road if you're feeling strong. It is a superb road for attacking riding. This is Alexander Vinokurov, who is sitting on the front here, and now he's been joined by Vicente Garcia da Costa. This is the group that has been left now by fitter legs, that of Cardenas, who's now joined Etchebarria in the pursuit of O'Grady, and up the road Bettini. And Stuart O'Grady, I think very wisely, didn't try to match the acceleration of Bettini, but he's shown us he's not tired. Otherwise, they would have picked him up. He is actually continuing to race at his own pace. And if he can do that, then, of course, the little groups might well join him. Looking down here now, all of the US Postals are at the front, trying to keep the tempo high enough to stop any attacks from the principal players of this year's Tour de France, the likes of Belocchi or Ullrich. Gone now, Christophe Moreau, surprisingly, to us, because we didn't expect it. He has retired today. 3 riders out of the Tour that we know of today. And looking down to the peloton there, the Postals are trying desperately to make this a fairly routine stage, because they know the next 2 days are so hard. And this is why Bettini here, an unlikely choice for a mountaintop victory, is gambling on an escape that might work. And that's why you have to congratulate Stuart O'Grady for thinking the same thing, because if he can stay away, then it's going to be a showdown on the final climb.
In this group behind, they're still trying to attack each other one at a time. This is Patrice Algon now trying to leap off the front. He wants to try and get himself as many points as possible in the King of the Mountains competition. A former very good cyclo-cross rider. He will be trying to split the group, which I think is the wrong tactic for the moment. That group behind, which is a group containing an awful lot of very good Spanish climbers, should try and work together, because then they could eat into the advantage of the lone leader, Paolo Bettini. This man right now, John Odriozola, is about to make contact. He's ridden the Tour de France every year since 1997. And you can see they don't want to let him get too far off the front. Alexander Vinokurov making the effort there for Team Telecom. Telecom riding quite sensibly here, Phil, launching men into the group, which is what was the original plan of US Postal Service by bringing Roberto Heras into the team. But right now, Roberto Heras really has only one job in hand in this year's Tour de France, not to be a co-leader with Lance Armstrong, but to be a lieutenant. And he's now riding into a terrain where I think Armstrong is going to reap the benefit of having 2 very strong Spanish climbers alongside him.
Latest information, O'Grady 2 minutes 5 seconds behind the leader. The main field back to 3 minutes 40 now.
And the man out the front is Paolo Bettini of Italy. Strangely, the Italians have not been much of a factor thus far in the Tour de France. In fact, the highest ranked Italian in the individual GC right now, Stefano Garzelli, 26 minutes 20 seconds out. Welcome back to the Tour de France. A look down one of the magnificent gorges that dot this part of Spain. Of France, near the Spanish border. We are in the Pyrenees. If you're just joining us, I'm Bob Varsha with Phil Liggett and Paul Sherwen. Live coverage of Stage 12 from Perpignan to Aix-les-Thermes. The peloton is following several breakaway groups right now. The big stories of the day: last year's 4th place rider Christophe Moreau, who won the prologue that began this year's Tour de France, is out. We're not sure why. He simply got off the bike, climbed into the Festina team car, and was driven away. More seriously, 2 riders fell on the high-speed descent from the Col de Jao. Sergei Ivanov, a stage winner on this year's tour, and Bram de Groot with the Rabobank team, both fell. Both were taken away in ambulances. We do not know any more about their condition, but both have been withdrawn from the tour. There's Paolo Bettini from Italy and the Mape team. Biggest bicycle racing team in the world. They started the year with 41 riders and a budget in excess of $10 million. But they've had no results to speak of in the Tour de France thus far this year. Bettini trying to change that. Stuart O'Grady chasing him in the green jersey. Then David Etchebarria and Felix Cardenas. Here are Phil Liggett and Paul Sherwen on the race call.
So there they are, and we're looking at the leader again. Paolo Bettini just moments ago crossed the Col de Coudon. He gets the victory, and now starts a very short descent before he gets into Belcaire, and then runs over to that town and then starts the long climb of the Col des Sept Frères. These are the two chasers that are just behind. There's the full board. How they can take all that in under effort, I'm not sure, because we have so many different groups on the road just now. These are the two chasers, which is Echeverria and Cardenas. And then O'Grady is in front of these and about a minute and a half behind the leader, Bettini. Then the group of 6 or so that these riders left are next at around about 3 minutes 20. Then it's back to the main field, which is now timed at 4 minutes 10 seconds. So that's the spread on the climb today. And at the moment, no reason for concern for the race leader, Francois Simon. He is keeping his race lead because he started the day with 11 minutes lead over Andrei Kivilev, who's still riding alongside him in the pack, and 13 minutes over Lance Armstrong, and the same can be said there. And so at the moment, things going very much the way of Francois Simon, and he won't be complaining about that.
Francois Simon will be very happy about the way the race has developed so far. He had a fairly nice day yesterday in the yellow jersey, able to go out riding with his team. But he has never been reputed as being a major climber. As we look here at the main field, a kilometre from the summit of that second climb of the day, a chance to look at the rear end of the main field. The bleached blonde hair there of Christophe Agneluto, a former winner of the Tour of Switzerland. And 1 or 2 riders from Bonjour slip into the back of the pack. These riders here are over 4 minutes behind the lone leader. The lone leader is Paolo Bettini. Riding back through the main field, Emmanuel Magnan finished second in a very tough sprint a couple of days ago to the summit of the climb of Serra, just outside of Liège, and there he was beaten by a storming Eric Zabel, who got his second win. There's O'Grady, the green jersey. He's just going to survive over the top of this climb. That's great. Yeah,
he gets second, and that's a substantial achievement for Stuart O'Grady. He's second on a second category col in the Tour de France. Then Cardenas goes over, and then Echeverria. So they're around 2:41 and about 2:37, something like that, behind Bettini. And now Stuart's got mates for the descent, and the advantage goes back to O'Grady because he descends pretty well.
Well, he's a great bike rider, Stuart, and today he'll be riding alongside riders that he's not normally used to being in a breakaway situation with, because he's now currently riding with 2 climbers. In fact, there isn't much of a descent off the summit of this climb. It really turns into much of a plateau at around about 1,000 meters in altitude, 3,000 feet. But O'Grady will cooperate with these guys because he'll try and stay off the front of the main field for as long as possible. Because although the points competition gives points to the best sprinter, there are still points on the mountain stages. They're not as big as they are on the flatter stages. As we can see, in fact, the second group on the road is not very far behind O'Grady, Cardenas and Echeverria.
And Algon is going to try and steal the points. He's second overall in the competition, but more importantly, it's his teammate, Laurent Roux, who is the leader. So he would like to take most of the points away from the rest of the race, but it looks as though Vinokourov is up there as well. So this is the chase group of 6. So we've now got 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 riders ahead of the peloton here. The next group we see will be the peloton as they run down towards the last 50 kilometers of the day. And they're proof that the sun is out here. As we look at the race leader, Paolo Bettini. It looks like we've given him the rough camera today because we're not getting very steady shots. But that is to do with the situation with the helicopter and the links to get the pictures live into the world. And by the world, we mean just about everywhere today for the Tour de France. As we see here now, Paolo Bettini looks very cool, Paul. He's known this situation before. He's never going to panic, is he?
He won't panic at all. 50 kilometers to go for Paolo Bettini, and then a small group behind the third group on the road. In fact, the American Bobby Julich trying to change the tables and putting himself on the attack to try and ride a little higher up the overall standings than he is just now.
And the downhill or descents are great places to attack, so we'll keep an eye on it for you and be back in just a moment with more live pictures of the 88th Tour de France unfolding here on OLN. Welcome back. This is one of our chase groups. This is a group of 6 riders, including American Bobby Julich. There is Lance Armstrong, wearing the number 1 of the 2-time defending race champion, riding in the midst of the U.S. Postal Service team, leading the peloton as they try to run down Paolo Bettini, then a group of 3 riders, then a group of 6 riders. Bettini 4 minutes 10 seconds up the road. Lance Armstrong came into this year's Tour de France as the first and thus far the only American rider ever to be ranked number 1 in the UCI World Rankings. He earned that by winning the Tour de Suisse just a week before kicking off the Tour de France and an attempt at a 3rd straight victory. Seems like a long time since the sands of Dunkirk. Now we are in the Pyrenees. There is Paolo Bettini leading the way. On the microphone once again, Phil Liggett and Paul Sherwen.
Paolo Bettini, as he stretches his lead a little bit. He's 2 3/4 minutes ahead of the chasing trio, 3.5 ahead of 6, 4 minutes 10 ahead of the peloton. There's his face, and it looks pretty cool right now. Well, Mape have always wanted to win a major stage race. They've been the world #1 team, but they've never had a big victory in a stage race. And they don't get that many big stage victories in stage races either, which is ironic because they dominate the World Cup events, which are the big single-day events. But now Bettini has taken a huge gamble here, shedding O'Grady on the climb of the Col de Coudon and gambling on a long ride to the finish alone. It's a very brave decision, and those 3 riders behind climb better than he does. Well, 2 of them do anyway, and there are still some very nasty climbs to come.
He's got around 30 kilometers of basically what is false flat, and then he plunges down into the town of Aix-les-Thermes. And then if he's got 3 or 4 minutes advantage, he will hope to survive on that big climb up to the summit of the Plateau de Bonascre. In fact, Mape signing up Stefano Garzelli during the winter months because they felt that that would be their greatest chance of getting themselves a win in a Grand Tour. Well, it didn't work in the Giro d'Italia because in fact Garzelli had to abandon because of a bronchial problem, and he was then coming forward here to the Tour de France, and he's really a long way down in the overall standings, Phil, although he did put a pretty impressive ride in the individual time trial up that mountain a couple of days ago. He lies 17th overall, 26 minutes behind, and that is around about 13 minutes behind Lance Armstrong. But for Mape, the important thing is to try and get themselves a stage victory. They've always got individual stage wins at the Tour de France with Tom Steels, and their sprinter now has had to abandon this race, and today they're gambling on a move like this on a stage where a lot of the main leaders are probably going to mark each other out, because tomorrow's stage up to Plateau is certainly going to be a very difficult one with some huge mountain climbs along the race route. They'll have to go over the Col de Porte d'Aspet, the Col de Monte, the Col de Portillon before then, over the Persaud, the Col de Val-Louron, and then finally dragging their backsides up the Saint-Lary and the Plateau. It's a very long, tough day in the saddle, and I think that is the day when we will see Francois Simon get blown away from the yellow jersey position, because although at the moment he's riding an unbelievable race on courage, courage doesn't make you into a climber.
No, it doesn't. You just have to suffer. Well, we're able now to update you on the Dutch rider Bram de Groot. I'm delighted to say that the helicopter was cancelled. He was able to get into the ambulance, so he's out of the Tour, but it sounds a lot better news for the young Dutch rider in his first Tour de France. 2 riders crashing on the descent of the Col de Joux de Day, both retiring, Ivanov and de Groot. And on the start of that climb, by the way, we lost the 6th place rider in the Tour, Moreau. So 3 names out today as we rejoin the front of this chase group of 6 riders. Still riding around about 3.5 minutes behind the front runner. There, the names for you. Vinokurov of Kazakhstan, teammate of Jan Ullrich, Sastre Odriozola, Bobby Julich, Patrice Algon, and Pasquale Lorente, who is a Spanish rider on the Kelme team. Bobby Julich there, the American rider, sitting at the back of this group, but he may have read a good attack here because he climbs better than most as they make their way up. They obviously had no intention of answering the attack by Echeverria or Felix Cardenas, who sensed they weren't going quick enough. Now a helicopter is pulling the camera back, which indicates to me that maybe, and it is so, the peloton are pulling back those 6 riders. So the impetus of US Postal is pulling that pack up to those 6 chasers. So that was a good decision as it's turning out. And then if you look straight ahead, briefly, we saw the mountains awaiting the riders now. This is the sort of farmland, flatland in between the foothills of the Pyrenees here. We're way down in the south of France. We are racing towards the beautiful Principality of Andorra. We don't quite get to race into the Principality this year. We stopped short by about 40 kilometers at the lovely little thermal town of Aix-les-Thermes. This is Bettini then, furrowing a lone trail, heading towards the Pyrenees. Still 3 climbs to come, including the one up to the finish, and that might yet be his downfall today.
And our finishing town of Aix-les-Thermes is indeed beautiful. It nestles in the Vallée d'Aix with 4 ski resorts and a national forest nearby, and a long history. In fact, the thermal waters in Aix-les-Thermes once were the basis of a hospital for warriors injured in the Crusades. Welcome back. There is the peloton, which has just captured the 6-man breakaway that included American Bobby Julich. There's the man in the yellow jersey on the far outside, Francois Simon, riding behind the French champion in the red, white, and blue of the tricolor, Didier Roux. So the peloton is starting to look aggressive, bringing down the gap to the man out front, Paolo Bettini. Between them is a 3-man group, and then one rider, Jan Ullrich from the Banesto.com team, who has fallen off the back of that group ahead. Here's Phil and Paul.
Well, the conditions have got so warm now, Paul, while we've been sat here this last 2 hours. I do believe that snow is disappearing off the peaks.
It does seem to be. It was only a light snowfall just a couple of evenings ago, but over 1,700 meters in altitude, a lot of snow did come down, and I hope that the big climbs we have to come over the next 2 days in the Pyrenees are kept clear and open, and most certainly they will, because the Tour de France does an excellent job keeping the roads open. And I think the most important thing is that the sun has finally returned, because these Pyrenean roads, Phil, if there is a spot of rain on them, the descents are absolutely treacherous. We've seen one very bad crash happen today on the descent of the Col de Joux, and 2 riders have had to abandon and been taken away to hospital in the ambulances. One of those, Sergei Ivanov, and the other one, a man who was as high as 3rd in the overall standings of this Tour, the Rabobank rider Bram de Groot. And that is good news that he didn't have to be evacuated by helicopter, but was able to get himself into the race ambulance. The lone leader at the moment, and I just, as you say, cannot believe how the weather has changed in the matter of 2 to 3 hours. The skies are absolutely magnificent now. There was a moment when we wondered if we wouldn't be able to get the helicopters into the air, and now it is absolutely like a summer day as it's supposed to be. And I hope that this weather rains for the next few days through the Pyrenees, because then we will be really able to see the magnificence of this mountain range at the southern part of France. This man, around about 20 kilometers for him until he gets to the summit of the Col de Joux, and then he will be able to plunge down the valley into Aix-les-Thermes, and then we'll get a chance to see if he will go out and get the stage victory for Marseille today. The main field at the moment are still 3 minutes and 55 seconds behind this lone leader, Paolo Bettini, and in that main field are all of the pre-race favorites, apart from Casagrande, who's abandoned from the race. And today, the surprise abandon of Christophe Marot, the man who finished 4th in the standings last year and won the opening day prologue. And it'll be interesting to see just exactly what was wrong with him. He wasn't happy with his mountain time trial performance, and today he abandoned after about 50 kilometers of the race.
We're back with the group of 3 here now. This is the group with O'Grady, Echevarria and Cardenas. They're now timed at 2 minutes 15 of the lone leader Bettini. And then behind them, the one man, Jan Ullrich, he's at 3 minutes 35. And the peloton we're now looking at, as always, charged up by the postal team. They are now officially at 4 minutes dead. So they pull back 10 seconds, which is hardly what we'd call a chase right now. They are just letting the race run out to see what happens to the boys up front, to see if indeed they can make the climbs and stay away today. Bettini doing the ride of his life just now, because those 3 boys are not getting that much closer to him at 2 minutes 15. But they'll try to close in on him once the climb starts. And the next climb that will come our way after the town of Belcaire will be the Col des Sept Frères, or the climb of the 7 brothers. And that will take them up to the 135-kilometer point. The Bonjour team there is sharing their drinks, asking he was asking Pena there of the US Postal Service team if he wouldn't mind passing the drink across to the Bonjour teammate on the other side, which he did.
Well, I wonder when we get to that climb of the 7 brothers if there'll be 7 brides for them there waiting over the summit.
Well, I'm not sure about that, Paul, but in any case, they're not going to have much time to stop, because they're not far away from the finish once over the 7 Frères. The rather nasty little climb of the Col de Joux, not so steep going up, but a treacherous descent coming down. And in fact, when we last climbed it for a finish in Aix-les-Thermes, that was back in 1965. The man who went over the top of the climb first was Rick Van Looy, and everybody knows, cycling knows, he was a sprinter, not a climber. And so that didn't say much for the climb, did it? And he didn't even win down below. That was won by the sprinter Guido Raybrook. And so those are neither climbers.
Well, thank you, gentlemen. This is a pretty typical French scene with the trees along the side of the road. There's a bit of an issue going on about those. Road safety advocates want those trees taken down to prevent accidents with people flying into them and getting hurt. Environmentalists, of course, don't want to hear that. Time now for our subway question of the day. Who are the 4 men who have won the world's greatest bike race, the Tour de France, in 3 consecutive years? We'll have the answer when we return, and the peloton continues its pursuit of Paolo Bettini, the Italian with the Mappe team. There's Odriozola all alone on the road. We'll be back. Welcome back to Live Pictures. There's Paolo Bettini leading away. Behind him, a group of 3 2 minutes back. Then 1 man alone, another minute 35 behind, and then 25 seconds to the peloton. Closing up on this man, Jan Odriozola. Once again, our subway question of the day was, who are the 4 men who have won the Tour de France in 3 consecutive years? The answer is Louison Bobet won 53 to 55. Jacques Anquetil 61 to 64. The great Eddie Merckx 69 to 72, and Miguel Indurain 91 to 95. Pick any 3 of his 5 in a row. The great names of the Tour de France. That is the elite company Lance Armstrong with the U.S. Postal Service team is trying to join with his 3rd consecutive Tour de France overall victory. That's the story unfolding in the days to come. Right now, here are Phil Liggett and Paul Sherwen.
And this is the team car here, Paul, of Crédit Agricole, and that's Roger Leger talking to Stuart O'Grady. The best of friends they are too, and what a good value he's got out of O'Grady this time out with the way he's led the Tour in yellow for 6 days. He's now leading it in green for the best points race rider, which is really an award to the most consistent daily finisher. That's when it was brought into the Tour in 1953 to give the sprinters something to aim for when they were really didn't have the ability to win the yellow jersey. But Stuart's worn both this year now as he sits on the wheel of 2 great climbers. What will he be thinking, Paul? He knows the climbs that are come, and he knows really mano a mano he can't match these 2.
All he's thinking about is just trying to stay off the front of the main field, and he will think as long as he can stay clear to the bottom of that last climb of the day, he may well get himself a top 10 finish, which will give him even more points in that competition. But for me, looking at Stuart O'Grady there, it's a huge revenge up for him on the Tour de France, because last year he was forced to pull out with a broken collarbone after a very dramatic crash when he thought he'd rival for the green jersey. Now this is rather interesting to see. Right across the front of the main field, we've got all of the riders from US Postal Service. They have had again bad luck today with again a very dramatic crash by Kierkegaard. Hincapie up there in 2nd position. Integrated into that long line of blue, there's another team wearing blue jerseys as well, and that is the team of the overall leader of the Tour de France so far, the Bonjour team of Francois Simon. And it's good to see that they're actually playing the game, because so far we've seen Lance Armstrong's team today assuming a position of leader of the Tour de France. Although Armstrong is only at the moment in 3rd place, his team are riding as if he was already in the yellow jersey.
Sven Turtenberg here, the German rider, joined Festina, good sprinter. He's loading up with bottles. He's playing domestique today, the helper, getting all the drinks for the team, and he'll ride back and distribute them amongst his Festina teammates. The one he won't be giving one to now is Christophe Moreau, their team leader, out of the Tour de France today, having retired. And there aren't many team leaders retired. In fact, the only other team leaders to give up, David Miller, the British rider and leader of the Cofidis team, crashed twice on the first 2 days, and also Francesco Casagrande, who crashed in a Giro d'Italia and then came here unfit and pulled out very early on.
1 minute 55 seconds for the chasers. They were not really making much of a headway into the lead of Paolo Bettini. Bettini is actually increasing his lead over the main field, which has gone back up to the 4-minute mark, and he will now try and stay off the front over these next 2 climbs of the day. And they're not really very difficult, Phil. They climb up around about 200 meters from Belcaire to the summit of the Col de Sept Frères, and then continue over a plateau before a kick up to the end towards the summit of the Col de Choula.
Still closing in, another 5 seconds nipped off. It's 1:55 now. The 3 chasers are inching their way closer to Paolo Bettini, and very soon we'll be on the 3rd from last climb of the day.
From these beautiful helicopter shots, you can look at the trees at the side of the road and see them bending slightly in the wind. That explains the echelon-style riding along the road, each man taking shelter in the lee side of the rider just half a bike length or so ahead of him. But one man has no shelter. There he is, out from the Mappe team. Paolo Bettini leads the Tour. There's a look at a couple of Jean de la Tour riders. One of them is Laurent Brochard, who has been a factor in the Tour, but he crashed a few moments ago. One of his teammates back there to help the Frenchman come forward. Here's the situation on the road with the sprint coming up. The second at Beauclair. 6, 4, and 2 points respectively for the top 3 riders. Paolo Bettini out front by 1:55. Behind him, Stuart O'Grady desperately wants those points. So the Crédit Agricole rider will be sprinting hard. David Echevarria and Felix Cardenas with him as we come up on 37 kilometers to go. And there are the 6 points going to Bettini. But the peloton is closing up. They're now 1:50 behind the O'Grady group. And this man, Bettini, is just 1:55 ahead of the pursuers. Here's the group of 3, currently shown 1:55 behind Bettini on the road. And they surely know that behind them, the peloton is coming. Now here's a look at Laurent Brochard with the long blonde ponytail as he makes the back of the peloton. 2 other riders there as well. Let's take another look at what happened to the Frenchman from Jean Teletour. This is him getting back up. No word as to who he might have collided with. He knocked his bars out, and he straightens them just as you or I would. Yeah, he's got a $7,000 bicycle, but what the heck? Just clamp that front wheel between your knees, straighten up the bars, hop back on, and away you go. There's the peloton to the left. U.S. Postal Service driving it. Lance Armstrong is right there. Telecom is right there. Jan Ullrich will no doubt be right there with Lance Armstrong. Let's get back to Phil Liggett and Paul Sherwen.
Still timed at 3:47. The peloton. This is the all-important sprint for O'Grady now, and he's going to have to lead it out, I think. Watch David Echevarria. We don't expect Cardenas to do much about it, but they may well have said we're not going to bother because they need each other here. This is O'Grady's territory. They've no interest in that green jersey competition. They're far too far behind. So they said to O'Grady, look, we're not going to waste your energy or ours. Take the 4 points. We don't need them. I think that's what's happened, Paul.
Absolutely. They're quite happy, I think, with the fact that Stuart O'Grady has continued to work with these riders over the flat part of this course. They know he's not going to be a danger when it comes up to the final climb of the day, so they've allowed him to take the maximum points there. That's a little thing that's happened and organised itself out on the course. And for Stuart O'Grady, that will extend his lead now in the sprint competition to 14 points over Eric Zabel. And that, at the end of the day, could be very important. A couple of years ago, I remember the result of that sprint competition going down to the very final sprint of the Tour de France. And Sean Kelly was trying to make it a 5th win. And on that occasion, it went to Frank Hoster, who actually finished just in front of Kelly in the sprint.
5 kilometers of climbing in ahead now as we climb the Col de les Sept Frères. Paolo Bettini is on the road. And they've just confirmed the result there. Bettini, O'Grady and Cardenas in that order at the sprint.
Look at this. Phil immediately went through the sprint point there. Stuart O'Grady has decided to let the 2 climbers carry on. His day is done. He's got himself 4 points, and a pretty hard way to get yourself 4 points in the Tour de France. And O'Grady now, I think, will just ride sensibly over the next 2 climbs and try and survive on the slopes of the final climb of the day. He's not too worried. He realizes he's not going to win the stage right now. A great ride by him, and he will now extend his lead in that competition. And today he will just ride nice and sensibly to the finish. These 2 riders, though, have got a different mission. They want to win the stage. David Echevarria, looking over his shoulder, probably quite surprised to see how quite easily O'Grady popped off the back.
Well, nonetheless, he's scored 140 points in that competition now to the 127 of Zabel. He's picked up 4 points on a day when Zabel wouldn't challenge. So it's very valuable indeed. And 13 points difference now, and there's 25 for a stage win. So it's going O'Grady's way just at the moment, as the Italians were the angel of the mountains there, cheering on an Italian going past. And here is Paolo Bettini. And the latest check now, 1:31 to the 2 chasers. And they are now free to fly because they climb really well. And we're starting this climb of the Col de Sept Frères. In fairness to us, didn't seem very hard when we drove over it. I admit we were in a car, but you can assess. And it's the next climb which I think will hurt. And of course, the last climb is rather difficult. So there's the result of that. 4 points is what's important for Stuart O'Grady in that green jersey competition. Now he's just got to survive to the finish. And there's the time check confirmed. We're commentating to you in the sun now, and I couldn't even read the blackboard, but maybe you at home could. As we see the 2 chasers here now, Cardenas and Echevarria aim for the leader.
So things are starting to close up toward the front. David Echevarria in orange. Felix Cardenas in the green and white stripes of the Kelme Costa Blanca team beginning to close in. None of them a threat to the front runners in the individual competition. But there's the peloton. Welcome back live. There's the man in the yellow jersey as we started today's stage 12 from Perpignan to Aix-les-Thermes, Francois Simon, and there is Lance Armstrong, the man who would try to wear it at the end of the day. We're not sure if that's going to happen. That all remains to be seen. And in this picture at the bottom right in the white jersey with the red, black, and yellow stripes of the German national champion is Jan Ullrich. Also in that group, you see the red polka dot on white field. That's the jersey of the King of the Mountains leader. So all the class leaders running fairly close together, except Stuart O'Grady, who is up the road and will be caught fairly soon. We would assume he picked up the maximum points available to him, second place at the last sprint. So he leads that competition over the telecom rider Eric Zabel. Right now, let's get back to the race call with Phil Liggett and Paul Sherwen.
As we look here now at the team lead of Euskaltel Euskadi, which is David Echevarria. Let me give you the latest time checks. It's 1:35. These two are now behind. Paolo Bettini, 2 minutes to Stuart O'Grady, 3 minutes 50 to the peloton with Jon Odriozola. As far as we know, has been swept up and has gone back into the main field. Little bit of wet surface here, the remnants of the day's heavy rain, which went off about 2 hours ago.
Well, Echevarria a couple of days ago got himself very close to a stage victory on the road into Aix-les-Bains, and he was very surprised by that last attack by Sergei Ivanov, who left off the front of the main field and held off these two riders who they thought were going to stay together until the finishing line. And that was quite a dramatic win for Ivanov, who got his revenge. And now, strangely enough, the Tour de France once again turning itself upside down, and Ivanov having to depart the Tour de France and climbing into the race ambulance. The other man who was in the breakaway on that day was Brad McGee, the former world pursuit champion. He too was hoping for a stage victory. But Echevarria is an aggressive bike rider, and the amazing thing about him, Phil, is he's able to attack on many terrains. He's a short rider, but very punchy. He has the ability not only to sprint at the end of large stages, but also to climb fairly well. But the lone leader at the moment is losing none of his time at all. He still possesses more than 1.5 minutes over the two chasers, who absolutely are not eating into his breakaway advantage at all. Paolo Bettini is 32 kilometers from the finish and only about 12 kilometers from the summit of the final climb before the descent into Aix-les-Thermes, the Col de Chioula. And that descent, I have to tell you, he's not going to lose any time at all of his advantage, because he's going to go down there like a man possessed. And it is a very tricky technical descent, and these riders are fairly lucky that the majority of the dampness is going to disappear from the road, because I thought coming down that road descent in the car last night, it was an ideal situation for mass crashes.
Well, at least the weather's drying up here in the shade of the trees. It's taking a little bit longer, and that could also be the problem on the descent of the Chioula, because it is shady. We drop down through the woods. These two riders still, in fact, as I speak, it's now come down to 1:25. So they are once again, now they're on the climb, the two climbers keeping a rhythm going here and working well together. You see each rider does about 100 meters or so big effort, while the other man saves his energy, and then he takes over and gives hit a blast, and the other man goes in the slipstream. That's the way to do it. They'll work together until they get near the finish, and then they'll attack each other for sure. And the US Postal just keeping the tempo. They'll be very content now with the way the race is going. With Pena, the rider who took the bottle to her Bonjour teammate early, he's on the front. But just to put it in perspective, Paolo Bettini is 88 in the race, 1 hour and 16 minutes behind the leader. That's why the leader's not chasing him. David Echevarria is 56 minutes behind. Felix Cardenas is 1 hour and 33 minutes behind. And Stuart O'Grady, who was with him, was the much highest place, 21 minutes back, but they knew he couldn't climb, and that's why the riders haven't been attacking.
Inside 1 kilometer to the summit of the Col des Sept Frères for Paolo Bettini, and he then, after the summit of this climb, has got a fair amount of false flat again before kicking up to the summit of the Col de Chioula. So this man may well go over the summit of the Col de Chioula with around about 1 minute advantage over the two chasers, who really are not eating into his lead at all, Phil. And interestingly enough, the Spanish riders haven't really gone out onto the attack as much as I thought they would. This has been quite a hard stage, buffeted by a lot of wind, and I think the riders will be quite satisfied with the wind today because it has blown away all of the clouds. And in fact, something you mentioned earlier about the snow over the mountains in front of us, it is actually disappearing with the sun. That is absolutely glorious here, and everybody from the start this morning wrapped up in huge weatherproof coats and now stripped down almost into just t-shirts.
I have to say, I've never knowingly known that before in 29 tours. But watching the mountain these past 2 hours, they've gone from white to green. So even at the height, we're looking up the mountain, by the way. We're not quite at the height here on the Plateau de Bonascre. But the actual snow is melting in the hot sun even higher up, which is a good news omen, I think, for the riders for tomorrow and the next day when we go to the Plateau mountain high above the beautiful Pyrenean town of Saint-Lary-Soulan. And then the next day, Luz-Ardidon, where we're high above the town of Luz-Saint-Savieux. So those are two real serious mountains, believe me.
These two chasers right now have certainly done nothing at all to eat into the advantage Paolo Bettini. Bettini will gain morale from this at the moment. He's riding a very sensible race. Now, the lone leader will ride at a tempo well below his maximum. He will ride at probably 85 or 90% of his maximum just to keep himself going along at a fairly steady tempo, and he will try and save something for the final climb of the day. A small attack coming off the front of the main field right now. This is Sébastien Demarbey, a Belgian rider on the AG2R team. He's trying to get some liberty from the group which is being led by US Postal, but maximum points at the summit of the Col de Sept Frères for Paolo Bettini. Here's Stuart O'Grady about to get picked up by the main field.
No, just Demarbey for the moment, and Stuart's making no effort to bother with him. He's asking where the rest are. Well, they're still a bit further down now. Stuart will do well. He must get to the top of this climb and recuperate for the descent and try and integrate into that field. And he should be able to hang on over the Col de Chula. It's not a great climb. Depends how fast the punch will attack it. But after that, he's going to have a tough one on the climb to actually turn, but that's all right. It's only 11 kilometers. I mean, only 11 kilometers, Paul. It's all over.
It's all over. It's still going to be a huge battle on this final ascent up here to the finish line. 7% is the average grade. And when we came up the first 2 or 3 kilometers, I thought it was very difficult indeed. That looks like a smooth attack going off the front there from a Mapei rider, and I think, judging by the size and style of that rider, it may well have been Michele Bartoli, but Stuart O'Grady now is comfortably back in the main field for a few kilometers at least.
So the climbing continues. Inside of 20 miles to go, there is the pursuers, Echevarria on the back, following over the top, and ahead of him is Felix Cardenas. And now they can rest just that little bit, keep the cadence up, and go a lot faster as the road turns down. So it is Bettini, Echevarria, and Cardenas. And Sébastien Demarbey right there from AG2R and the peloton. Quick look back over the shoulder of Felix Cardenas, and there is Sébastien Demarbey. There's the Postal Service, along with the Bonjour team, still driving the peloton as they make their way up to the Col des Seven Brothers, waiting for their 7 brides, as Paul Sherwen so cheesily put it earlier. Speaking of Paul Sherwen, he's standing by with Phil Liggett to pick up the live race call. Take it, fellas.
And as we do look down here at the Postal team, just launching that attack, Michele Bartoli, along with the champion of Spain, Gutierrez, rapidly has picked up Sébastien Demarbey. So there's 3 of them now, and Bartoli on the same team as Paolo Bettini, and they're also very, very close friends. It might be a plan, this, for Bettini to draw the sting of the race and for Bartoli to catch up and jump to the victory. That's possible.
Absolutely. He will not ride too hard in the group behind until he sees what sort of advantage they're building up over the main field. But you can see the main field now actually picking up their tempo as we go through the town of Camurac after 136 kilometers covered, because he's joined there by Ivan Gutierrez, the champion of Spain. And those riders may well start to open up a clear advantage over the main field. But I think Armstrong and his team want to try and pull this race fairly close back together.
Now, this is Paolo Bettini still pressing on, not in considerable speed either. The riders behind having to work pretty hard to try and pull him back into the fold here. News may not have reached him yet either, his teammate. Michele Bartoli is also in a group of 3 now, including the champion of Spain, Ivan Gutierrez. This is the chase group of 2 that O'Grady was with, but O'Grady now back in the bunch. Shouldn't have had any problem holding the bunch over the top of the climb. As we go along this false flat, which is occasionally downhill, then we kick on to the Col de Chula, which is not a very long col. The descent after that is a long way down and very tortuous indeed. We were quite amazed yesterday coming down in the car. Very dangerous, sharp bends and sheer drops off the edge. So that's going to be an exciting descent, to say the least. But thankfully it's dried out. The weather conditions are now superb. Here's the chance to see the champion of Spain. Won his first ever championship of his own country the week before the Tour started, because all of the national championships around the world are always held the Sunday before the Tour de France starts. So Gutierrez won the Spanish one. Bartoli and Demarbe may be saying to himself, I've got myself a good couple of riders here to join me now, because he's not a highly successful bike rider, but read the moves right and of course you get success. There's the peloton, still under the control of US Postal and Team Bonjour, as they are just doing enough not to do too much today.
Well, Bartoli needs to read this move correctly, because at the moment what he's doing is in fact encouraging the main field to chase him down, and that will reduce the advantage of his man off the front of the bike race, Paolo Bettini. He's in a group of 3 chasers, and quite literally what he should do now is actually sit on the back until his group opens up an advantage of 30 or 45 seconds over the main field, because you can see that long line in the main field indicates that the US Postal Service at the front are putting the pressure on now, pulling themselves closer to the final climb of the day, the Col de Chula, before that long descent into Aix-les-Thermes, and then they climb up here to the Plateau de Bonascre. So at the moment, Bartoli not really playing the team move by actually acting as a carrot in front of a mule to this main field.
Well, since we've gone over the top of the hill, Bettini has started to pull away again from the 2 chasers. He's taken 5 seconds back. It's now 1.5 minutes. Here's the man that gets the best seat in the house to see the riders. You'll see the picture, no doubt, on the front of some national newspaper tomorrow. 2 minutes the gap back to the Bartoli group, and 3:55 back to the main field. We're in the town of Prades now for Bartoli, and soon we will start the climb of the Col de Chula. And this will start as we leave the town here, and then we have that huge descent we've been talking about. So one more climb to come for Bettini, the long descent, and then it's hang on for your life as he will race for the line up the climb of the Bonascre.
The Col de Chula is a climb of 5.3 kilometers. Not very steep, averaging only 3.2%, but when you've been at the front of the bike race for such a long time, it does start to eat into the thighs and makes it very painful indeed. The situation on the road is still looking very good for Paolo Bettini, but when he sees this climb up to the summit of the Chateau de Bonascre, it's going to really below his morale, because it is a difficult climb over the first 3 or 4 kilometers, and he could find himself rapidly losing most of his advantage. The 2 chasers are still hovering behind him, David Echevarria and Felix Cardenas. It's looking pretty good for the Colombian.
Coming up on 25 kilometers to go, about 16 miles for Paolo Bettini, separating him from a possible first stage win on this year's tour. There are the men chasing him. Echevarria in orange, Cardenas in the Kelme colors, an Italian, a Spaniard, and a Colombian up front. If any of them win, it will be the first stage win for his country on this year's tour. These are the 2 men chasing our front runner, Paolo Bettini, 1 minute 15 seconds up the road. This is David Echevarria riding with Felix Cardenas. And then 1 minute 30 back is a group of 3. Ivan Gutierrez, Michele Bartoli, and Sebastian Demarbe. And then 1 minute and 15 seconds further back is the peloton, right there on your screen, winding its sinewy way along the roads of southern France, approaching the higher Pyrenees, and a stout uphill pull to the finish in Aix-les-Thermes. Right now, let's get back to the live race call. Once again, here are Phil Liggett and Paul Sherwen.
Well, Around about 31 kilometers still to go to the finish for these riders, and on the front of the main field it's still all of the US Postal Service setting the tempo, and they are slowly but surely pulling back the lone leader Paolo Bettini. Bettini still holding on to a slight advantage over the main chasers, Echevarria and Felix Cardenas, around about a minute and 15 behind him right now. Over the summit of this final climb before the descent down into Axles-les-Thermes, he will face 20 kilometers of riding, and he won't lose too much time on the descent, but they may well catch him, Phil, over the first couple of kilometers of that final climb.
Well, there we are. Bettini now is trying to run for gold, and it will be a tremendous stage victory for him. But somehow it is a steep climb up to the finish. It starts very steeply, it gets a little bit easier halfway up, and then kicks again up to the finish. It'll be a tough call because he's been out in front now from the 70th kilometre of the race. We are just 15 miles or 24 kilometres from the finish.
You see now that he's starting to be somewhat fatigued. His pedalling action not as fluid as it was just a few moments below. The top half of his body starting to roll as he tries to keep that big gear ticking over. And in comparison to that, we've got the two little climbers who are chasing him, who are looking still quite punchy, still got a lot of energy in their pedaling action. The Colombian rider Felix Cardenas must be certainly thinking about the possibility of a Colombian stage victory today, and this is the terrain of the Spanish and Colombian riders once we go into these very difficult Pyrenean climbs. But he's going to have to try and outfox David Echevarria, a very talented rider who's capable of performing on all kinds of terrains. But I do think, Phil, he's not quite the climber that Felix Cardenas is. Cardenas is in his second year as a professional bike rider, and he did actually get himself a stage victory in the Vuelta a España last year, as the main field now go under 25 kilometers to go.
The gap is coming down. 1:05 now. It is the two leaders from the front man. And so I don't think they're going to contact him on the descent, because I think the advantage goes back to Bettini once we get over the top of the Schule and start the long twist down. They're going to have to catch him on the lower slopes and before the finish of the actual climb itself. 2.5 minutes back to the next group on the road, which is the Bartoli group of 3, and then 3:55 back to this big peloton, which is still being dominated by the US Postal team. Here he is, Paolo Bettini. He's had a wonderful career, the classic winner, won Liège-Bastogne-Liège last year. And the first thing he did was pick up the telephone when he was just minutes after crossing the line and ring Michele Bartoli to tell him he'd won, because the previous year Bartoli was the winner, and that's his mate.
And Bartoli hadn't been able to ride that Liège-Bastogne-Liège because he was still coming back from that dramatic crash which saw his kneecap absolutely blown into smithereens. It was locked together by pieces of wire, and after that he made a long, hard comeback. In fact, the week before, or 2 weeks before that Liège-Bastogne-Liège, he'd taken part in the Tour of Flanders, where he thought he'd be the leader of the team, and his morale took a serious bending when he was blown to pieces on one or two of the cobble climbs leading up towards the finish.
Back to the USP boys as they continue. They've looked like a very good, strong team today, well capable of handling the affair when Lance Armstrong takes yellow. Tomorrow is the day that Armstrong is expected to attack like he did it in the Alps. But again, it may be on the final climb of the Plateau. It is a long, long climb to the dizzy heights of the Pyrenees tomorrow for the big finish. And many of the spectators will make the journey to the top by ski lift, which will be operating for all of the people to go right to the top to watch the finish of the Tour, because it is quite likely, this road is pretty narrow up there, the police will stop all vehicles going up very early tomorrow morning. This again is Paolo Bettini. He's now 27 years of age, and this year only 2 wins to his credit, both coming as stage wins in the Tour of Langkawi. I was there in Malaysia with him, and one of the few races he wins in a bunch sprint was one of those stages he got up there, and he battled it out with his teammate Paolo Lanfranchi for the final yellow jersey, and it went to Lanfranchi, and Bettini winning second place overall on the classification.
2 chasers now on the final few kilometers of the Col de Schule. Not a huge climb itself, but the one that they will be facing up to the finish line really is. It's a complete distance of 9.5 kilometers with an average gradient of 7.2%, and that is a very difficult gradient. But I would say the first couple of kilometers are the worst, at an average of around about 10%. then we must almost certainly see an attack coming from the Spaniard here in the Colombian in the green and white Spanish team of Kelme. And at the front of the race, Phil, it looks now as if Paolo Bettini really is starting to suffer. And it's been a very long, hard breakaway for him, because although the weather looks absolutely magnificent, there's been a very strong wind on this race since the start in Perpignan this morning.
When we last came over this climb in '97, it was Richard Veronk who was first over the top. But we didn't go to Aix-les-Thermes. We passed straight through and kept going into Andorra and climbed over the Port d'Envalira, which is a massive mountain, at the top of which is the gateway and the border post into Andorra itself. And then the race carried on down to Arcolis, and that was where Jan Ullrich ripped them apart.
Very important day for Jan Ullrich. He was still working for his team leader at the time, Bjarne Riis, and he saw that Bjarne Riis was absolutely suffering. And he decided then to try and go ahead, and he won the Tour de France himself. But this today has been a very difficult ride for these men, moving away from the Mediterranean coast. They were riding for 166 kilometers on today's stage. The first climb of the day was very difficult, the Col de Joux, and that saw the abandon of Christophe Moreau. And then finally they're going over these final few climbs then up to the Col de Choula before dropping down into the valley of Aix-les-Thermes, and the last ascent up to the summit just above the small thermal village, and that is where this race will absolutely blow apart. He's still holding a minute advantage over the two chasers, and not that much further back is his teammate. There you can see Michele Bartoli, who is actually not doing too much in that group at the moment, because he, Phil, will leave everything up to the last climb and hope that his teammate Bettini can survive. Stewie O'Grady, and I would think this is probably at the back of the main group, because Stewie's had a long ride today, but he's done well. He's increased his lead in the green jersey competition, and there is confirmation of that in the main field just in front of him.
Yes, they just announced on race radio that Stuart O'Grady had lost contact with the peloton. But if he can just keep them in sight for a couple of kilometres, he'll be over the top of the Choula, and no doubt O'Grady will have the strength and the skill to rejoin on this descent, because he's a better descender than the vast majority of the riders in this year's Tour de France. And then once in the back of the group again, he'll wave au revoir at the start of the final climb, which is an 11-kilometre ascent. He won't be in any danger of being eliminated today. Elimination, by the way, is a percentage based on the winner's time for the day, and depending on the average speed of the race, they tell you what the percentage is. And today will be around about 13-15% probably, because it's a mountain stage, which means you'll have plenty of time to get in.
Eric van der Aarden, the team captain, the team director sportif, coming up alongside. There's the summit of the climb there now for Paolo Bettini, not very much more than 300 meters away, and he will be more than happy to see that, Phil, because over the top of this he will plunge down into the valley below, and that is good news for him. He won't lose too much now of his 1 minute advantage, and I think as he rides through the town of Aix-les-Thermes, he will start at the bottom of the final climb of the day, conserving well into 1 minute of that lead over the chasing group of two, Echevarria and Cardenas.
Team car 13 today in the convoy. It might be lucky for him, you never know.
You see the snow atop the Pyrenean peaks in the distance. This is the chase group. Gutierrez, Bartoli, and Demarbay, the second chase group, fully 3 minutes and 55 seconds behind our leader, Bettini. Welcome back as we look down on the peloton, making its way up into the foothills of the Pyrenees. They currently stand 3 minutes 55 seconds behind our breakaway leader Paolo Bettini, 48 seconds back. Two pursuers, Echevarria and Cardenas, another 2 minutes and 2 seconds back, Gutierrez, Bartoli, and Demarbay. Well, these were the chasers. On the left, Cardenas, on the right, Echevarria, as they crested the col. This is Bettini on the downslope. He's been leading for about 100 kilometers or so, I would guess. Certainly nothing like the longest single breakaway we've seen thus far on the Tour this year, that by Laurent Roux, who was away for 200 kilometers before he was nailed on the climb up Alpe d'Huez by Lance Armstrong. And as you can see, Bettini is absolutely flying in the big ring and working hard. Now here's the second group of chasers, Gutierrez, Bartoli, and Demarbay making their way over the top. And here is the peloton now approaching. You saw the gap there, 3 minutes 36 seconds and counting before they get to the break point. Piling up climbing points today is Michele Bartoli, as well as sprint points. He's been the first to the last couple of bonuses. Let's go back to Phil Liggett and Paul Sherwen.
We're looking at the descending style here of the man in front now. He's just gone down so quickly, he can't get any more speed out of the bike, so he's using his streamlining to try and lift it that little bit. Situation over the top. Bettini went over the top of the Col de Shula, 48 seconds ahead of Cardenas, Echeverria and Bartoli. 2 minutes 2, Bartoli led over with the other two chasers, and at 3 minutes 35 seconds confirmed for the peloton over the top of the Col de Shula. Now, I think for the moment at least the advantage will go back to the leader, because quite clearly Cardenas doesn't like descending, and this is not a good descent if you don't like descending. This is the easy bit now, but watch out for the curlies. They're not very far away. Now, for all you youngsters learning to descend, watch how these guys go round corners. You will see they'll push their bike into the corner and use their body to counterbalance it and try and stay upright.
Very low aerodynamic position there for this man at the front, Paolo Bettini, in the straights. This is something you shouldn't try until you're exceptionally good at bike handling. That's a very dangerous maneuver which many of the professionals adopt to try and pick up as much speed as possible. Very much like the kind of position a downhill skier will adopt, keeping themselves as low as possible over the front end of the machine. But it is a dangerous thing to do. Echeverria has got around about 50 meters advantage right now over the man who was with him in that two-man chase group, Felix Cardenas, and Cardenas will just hope that he doesn't lose too much time on this descent to Echeverria. This is not the most difficult part of the descent right now, and we're looking at speeds here as we rejoin Paolo Bettini of around about 90 kilometers an hour. That's over 50 miles an hour.
Yes, but we're getting into the zone now, and believe us, we are breathing a sigh of relief. This col is dry. Yesterday it was wet and it was full of oil, as if vehicles before it had been dripping oil. It was extremely dangerous, but it's dry today now. 14 kilometers to go. We will shortly lock into the hairpin bends. Suddenly this corkscrew straight into the ground, and here's the first one now, and you see Bettini locking up there and getting round it, taking it wide. Listen to the crowd down there, Paul.
Absolutely remarkable. The people realize just how tricky this descent was going to be. Normally the people are queuing up to see the mountain slopes here, but today, as we said yesterday in the car, this will be a great place to watch this bike race today, because they will come absolutely hammering down here, and you see that position of Bettini going into that corner. Absolutely remarkable. The main field still controlled by US Postal Service. They'll try and put Armstrong into an ideal position at the bottom of this climb, and everybody will be worried now about the possibility of a flat tire. Let's look at this one more time. You see how he got his leg right out there. That was to get his leg center of gravity as low as possible. He's not losing anything at all in his momentum going around.